The fire was already smaller than it should have been. No one had noticed yet. They were laughing, the four of them, passing a bottle of something cheap around the ring of stones. The trees stood close on all sides. They always do out here. Walk with me tonight. My name is Silas, though some still call me the Wanderer. I have been walking these woods for longer than most things survive, and tonight I will tell you what I witnessed. I had been walking this ridge long before the trail markers existed, long before the trail. The four of them had arrived around dusk in a truck that groaned on the switchbacks. They set up their tents with the casual efficiency of people who had done this before. They knew the motions. They did not know the place. The girl with the red jacket, her name was Mara, had chosen the spot near the eastern edge of the clearing. Her tent sat slightly apart from the others. She had not planned it that way. It simply ended up like that, the way some things do. The others were Marcus and Joel and a woman named Diane, who laughed loudly and often. They were in their late 20s, old enough to know better, young enough not to. By the time the sky went fully dark, the fire had recovered some. Marcus had thrown on 2 thick logs and the flames climbed again. Diane was telling a story about a camping trip gone wrong somewhere in Colorado. Nothing terrible had happened there, just rain and a broken cooler, but she told it like something had. Joel was quiet. He had been quiet since they parked the truck. I noticed that. Mara kept looking at the tree line, not nervously, not obviously, just glancing, the way you might glance at a door that doesn't quite sit flush in its frame. You're not afraid of the door, but something about it keeps pulling your eyes back. They ate late. Canned soup heated over the fire, crackers, a block of cheddar cheese that Marcus cut with a folding knife. Simple food tastes different out here. They ate without plates, mostly, passing things around. Joel barely ate. He said he wasn't hungry. Diane made a joke about altitude sickness. Joel didn't laugh. He said, quietly, that the altitude was fine. He just wasn't hungry. Around 11, the wind picked up from the north. Not strongly, just enough to move the tops of the pines in slow, lazy circles. Mara pulled her jacket tighter. She asked if anyone else thought it smelled strange. Marcus sniffed the air and said he didn't smell anything. Diane said it was probably just the trees. Joel said nothing. He was looking at the same part of the tree line Mara had been watching. They were not looking at the same thing, or maybe they were. It is difficult sometimes to know what people see and what they think they see. Those are rarely the same. The first strange thing happened just after midnight. Diane had gone to her tent to get a sweater. She came back holding it, but she hadn't put it on. She stood at the edge of the firelight and looked at the other 3. She said, "Did one of you move my bag?" Marcus said no. Joel said no. Mara said she hadn't been in the tent. Diane looked at the sweater in her hands. She said her bag had been on the left side of her sleeping mat when she packed it. It was on the right side when she got there. Marcus said she probably just didn't remember. Diane didn't argue, but she kept holding the sweater without putting it on. A little after 1 in the morning, Joel stood up and said he was going to walk to the creek. The creek was maybe 300 feet down the slope, through a thin stretch of trees. Marcus told him to take a headlamp. Joel said he'd be fine. He walked into the dark without one. The trees swallowed him quickly. They waited. Mara poked at the fire with a stick. Marcus refilled his cup. Diane finally put on her sweater. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Marcus called out Joel's name toward the dark. The trees gave nothing back, not even an echo. That is a thing about certain places. Sound doesn't carry the way it should. I have walked through clearings where a shout disappears 3 feet in front of you, as if the air has already decided it doesn't want to hold the noise. At the 15-minute mark, Marcus grabbed a headlamp and went after Joel. Diane and Mara stayed by the fire. They sat closer together without commenting on it. Mara fed a small piece of wood to the flame. Diane asked if she thought they were okay. Mara said she thought so. A pause grew between them, natural and unhurried. Then Mara said, "Did you hear something earlier?" Before Diane went for her sweater. Diane looked at her. She said, "What kind of something?" Mara thought about it. She said, "I don't know." Like someone adjusting their weight on gravel, but there's no gravel out here. Diane looked at the dark around them. She said, "No, I didn't hear that." Marcus found Joel at the creek. Joel was crouched at the water's edge, holding his hand in the current. When Marcus came through the trees, Joel didn't look up right away. Marcus said his name. Joel looked up then. He said, "Did you hear it?" Marcus said he hadn't heard anything. He asked what Joel was talking about. Joel stood up and dried his hand on his jeans. He said, "Never mind. The water was just louder than I expected." He said it calmly, like a thing that explained itself. Marcus looked at the creek. It was a thin creek, the kind that barely makes a sound. They walked back up the slope together. Marcus pointed the headlamp at the path. Halfway up, Joel stopped. He put his hand out, touching Marcus on the arm. Marcus stopped too. Joel said, "Don't point the light at the tent." Marcus asked why. Joel said, "Just don't. Not yet." Marcus held the light low. They stood there for a moment. The tents were visible through the trees, the orange dome of Diane's, the gray of Joel's, Mara's dark green one. Nothing was moving. There was nothing to see. Joel exhaled. He said, "Okay, we're fine." He started walking again. Marcus followed. He didn't ask what Joel had been looking for. Some questions feel like they shouldn't be asked out loud. Back at the fire, Diane asked if everything was okay. Marcus said, "Yeah." Joel sat down and looked at his hands. Mara looked at Joel for a long moment. She said, "You heard it too, didn't you?" It was not a question. Joel looked up at her. He didn't answer right away. Then he said, "What did you hear?" Mara shook her head a little. She said, "I'm not sure I can describe it." Joel nodded, like that made sense, like the inability to describe it was itself confirmation. Marcus said they were both tired. He said, "Sound moved strangely in the woods at night. The ears played tricks." He said, "All the reasonable things that reasonable people say." He was not wrong to say them. The fire was burning low again. This time, no one moved to feed it. Around 2 a.m, Mara went to her tent. She zipped the door, took off her boots, and lay on top of her sleeping bag. She didn't close her eyes. She lay there looking at the fabric ceiling of the tent. A small moth had found its way inside. It circled near the top, close to the seam. She watched it for a while. Then she heard something outside, footsteps, slow and unhurried, and moving around the perimeter of the camp. She thought it was Marcus or Joel walking to the tree line to relieve himself. She lay still. The footsteps circled once, then stopped. She waited. They didn't resume. She sat up and unzipped the tent door an inch. She looked out. The fire was embers now. Diane's tent was still, Joel's tent was still. Marcus was visible. A shape in his camp chair, head tipped back, asleep. There was no one walking. There had been no one walking. Mara zipped her tent closed. She moved inside her sleeping bag. She did not sleep for a long time. At 3 a.m, Diane woke up. She said afterward that she didn't know why she woke. There was no sound that she remembered, no dream. She simply opened her eyes and was completely awake. She lay there for a moment. Then she reached for her phone to check the time. The phone screen lit the inside of the tent. She looked at the time. Then she looked at the corner of her tent. She said, afterward, that it took her a moment to understand what she was looking at. There was a shadow on the tent wall. Not her shadow. She wasn't moving. The shadow was. She said it was shaped like a person, but the proportions were wrong. The shoulders were too high, or the neck was too long. She wasn't sure which. She said it lasted no more than 4 or 5 seconds. Then it was gone. She lay very still for a long time after. She told the others in the morning. She told it matter-of-factly, the way people sometimes tell things when they don't want to sound afraid. Joel listened without expression. Marcus said it was probably the shadow of a branch moving in the wind. Mara asked if there had been wind. Marcus said there was always some wind. Diane nodded. She said that was probably it. She said it without conviction. In the morning, the camp looked ordinary. Daylight had that effect. The trees were just trees. The creek was where it was supposed to be. The fire pit was cold ash, and the ring of stones they had arranged the evening before. One of the stones had moved, not far, maybe a foot, but it had moved. It was sitting slightly outside the circle, turned at an angle. Marcus said one of them must have kicked it. Nobody argued with that, but nobody agreed either. They just looked at the stone. They packed up slowly. The mood was difficult to name. Not frightened exactly, but quieter than the night before. Even Diane, who had talked steadily through the drive up, through dinner, through most of the night, was mostly quiet. She rolled her sleeping bag without comment. Joel's tent was already down before the others woke up. He had been up before the light. When Mara asked him about it, he said he slept badly and woke early. He said the ground was uncomfortable. He said it with the practiced sound of someone repeating a prepared explanation. As they were loading the truck, Mara walked back toward the fire pit. She said she wanted to check that the coals were fully out. They were. She stood there a moment, looking at the camp. Then she looked at the tree line, the same stretch of trees she had been watching since the first evening. She stood there for a long moment. Then she turned and walked back to the truck. She did not look back again. I watched the truck move down the switchbacks. The sound of the engine faded slowly. Then it was gone. The forest came back to itself, the way it always does. It is worth noting one more thing. Not because it explains anything, because it is what happened. When Mara walked back to check the fire pit, she paused for approximately 30 seconds at the edge of the clearing. During that time, she was looking at the eastern tree line, the same place she had been watching since the moment they arrived. I know what is in that part of the forest. I have walked through it many times. There is nothing there that should draw attention, nothing that should pull the eye. And yet, she looked. The way you look at something when you can't find it, but you know it's there. I do not know what she saw, or whether she saw anything at all. That distinction matters sometimes, and other times it doesn't matter at all. There are nights in this forest when the air holds something it shouldn't. I could not tell you what it is. I could tell you that it has always been here, that it was here long before the trail markers, long before the trail, long before the people who built the trails, and the people who forgot them. It is not a presence exactly. It is more like an awareness, a quality of attention, the feeling of being precisely observed from a direction you cannot identify. Joel felt it first, I think, at the truck, before he had even seen the campsite. Some people arrive at places already changed by them, as if the arrival and the effect are not separate events, as if the place has already been waiting, and the moment of noticing is simply the moment the waiting becomes mutual. I do not have a way to explain that. I am only telling you what I saw, the stone that moved, the one that ended up outside the ring. No one kicked it. I can tell you that with certainty. No one touched it. It moved sometime between 1 in the morning and 4, in the interval when all 4 of them were in their tents, when the fire was at its lowest, when the camp was as close to dark as it got. I watched the fire go down to almost nothing, just a thin red eye in the ash, and I watched the clearing, and the stone was in its place, and then it was not. I did not see it move. I only know that it did. That is not unusual. In my experience, there are things you see only in the before and the after. The movement itself remains invisible. Diane's shadow, the thing she saw on the wall of her tent. I will not describe what I think it was, not because I am uncertain, but because some descriptions do more harm than good. What I will say is that the camp sits in a corridor, a long, narrow strip of open ground between 2 dense sections of old growth. I have walked this corridor for longer than I will say. Things pass through it. They have always passed through it. Most nights, nothing pauses. That night, something did. Whether it was curious or whether curiosity is even the right category, I cannot say. I only know that it paused, and that Diane was awake when it did, and that what she saw on the wall of her tent was an accurate representation of what was outside it, accurate in most ways. I have said enough. The truck made it down the mountain in good time. They stopped at a gas station at the edge of a small town and bought coffee and did not speak much. Mara looked out the window at the tree line as they passed. Joel drove. He kept both hands on the wheel. His eyes stayed on the road. Marcus told the story. At a party 2 weeks later, he told it as a funny story. Strange noises, a stone out of place, Diane seeing things. He made it light. He made it the kind of story where everyone is fine, the kind of story with a reasonable explanation at the end, even if the explanation is never quite stated. People laughed at the right moments. Diane was not at that party. She had not seen Marcus since the trip. Joel had not either. Mara did not tell the story, not at any party, not to anyone. I think she understood, without being able to articulate it, that telling the story would require her to explain the part she couldn't explain, and she wasn't willing to say that out loud. Some people know the difference between what they can say and what they should say. That knowledge comes at a cost. The cost is carrying the unsaid thing. For a long time sometimes. I have been walking this forest for a long time. I have watched many people come through it. Some people leave easily. They pack their bags and drive away, and within an hour the place has dissolved into anecdote. Other people carry it with them. Not as a memory exactly, more like a change in how they hold themselves, a slight recalibration of how much they trust the edge of their own perception. Mara was the second kind. I could tell you more about why, but I won't. The campsite is empty now. The ring of stones is just a ring again. The stone that moved is where it ended up. No one put it back. The fire pit is cold. The trees stand where they always stand. If you walked in here now, in the daylight, you would see nothing. You would feel nothing, probably. You would look at the clearing and think it was a nice place to camp. You might even choose the spot near the eastern tree line. It gets good light in the morning. People always choose that spot. I have noticed that for a long time. I find it interesting. I could not tell you why they choose it. They could not tell you why either, if you asked. They would say it seemed like a good spot. They would say the light looked nice. They would not say that something made the choice feel already made, that standing in the clearing, it simply felt inevitable. Like the place had already decided, and they were only agreeing. Most nights I pass through and keep moving. I have a great deal of ground to cover. I always have, but some nights I stop. I watch the fire. I watch the people around it. I watch the way the firelight makes the tree line look like a wall, and how the people keep looking at that wall, and how none of them quite says what they're looking for. I find that interesting too. There is one more thing. When the four of them were driving up the switchbacks, and the truck groaned on the tight curves, they passed a trailhead marker, handmade, a weathered post, with a piece of painted wood nailed to it. It had a name on it, the name of the trail. Beneath that, someone had added something in marker, handwritten, faded now, but still legible. It said, "Do not camp on the east side of the ridge." No explanation, no date, just that. None of them mentioned seeing it. I cannot say whether they did not see it, or whether they saw it and said nothing, or whether they saw it and forgot, the way you sometimes forget the things that should have stayed with you. The truck was already past it by the time any of that might have mattered. These are the things I witnessed that night. I have told them plainly and in order to the best of my ability. I have not added anything that was not there. I will be walking this ridge again tonight. I walk it every night. I have for longer than the markers say, longer than anyone would think to count. The forest is quiet now. It is almost always quiet, but some nights, just before the light goes, the trees at the eastern edge move. There is no wind when they move. There is never any wind. I have noticed that. I notice most things. That does not mean I understand them. Walk carefully. The dark does not begin at nightfall. It was here long before the light arrived, and it will remain long after you have gone. Some stories end. I do not. Walk with me again. Soon.